Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll start off, we have our collective bargaining, and then we'll move on to our regular board meeting. Before we get started, just welcome you all here this evening, and we're going to start off with our Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence, and Mrs. Wise will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. Now that we're all seated, we're appropriately socially distant, and you may remove your mask if you choose to. We just ask that if you're coming up to the microphone, that you put your put your mask on the way to and from the microphone. Can I get a roll call, please, Dr. Goldberg?
Dr. Powers?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Wise?
Here.
Mr. Irwin?
Here.
Mr. Lockhart?
Here.
Mr. Burks?
Present.
Ms. Lauer? Present.
And I'll now entertain the motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Wise made the motion to approve. Mrs. Lauer seconded that. Can I get a roll call to open the public hearing on collective bargaining?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer? Aye.
Mr. Cox?
Good evening, President Irwin, Superintendent Hayworth. I'm here tonight to introduce the mandated state requirement public hearing that is of 2019 is required prior to commencement of bargaining between the school corporation and its teacher association. The purpose of this public hearing is to allow public comments, if any, on the bargaining process, the discussion process, and the current 2019-2020 collective bargaining agreement. Mr. Board President, now is appropriate time for any public comments concerning these matters.
Anybody would like to come forward? You would have the same 5 minutes that you would for any public comment section. Seeing nobody moving forward for a comment, I would now entertain a motion to close the public hearing and at the same time open our regularly scheduled board meeting.
I so move.
Second.
Dr. Powers made the motion to approve. Mr. Burks seconded that motion. Can I get a roll call, please?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer? Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Goller. Keeping with tradition of recent meetings, we will start off by reading our vision, mission, and core values. Our vision is working together with our community. We inspire our students to discover their talents and rise to their greatest potential. Our mission is building on the strengths of our diverse community. We create an engaging, comprehensive educational environment that supports the growth of lifelong learners. Our values are: we are committed to always asking and answering what is in the best interest of each student. Leading by example, we are committed to personal accountability and work habits, honesty and respect. We are committed to a safe, secure, and welcoming environment. We are committed to practices of inclusive excellence that value differences. We are committed to respecting the voice of all district stakeholders through collaborative engagement. And we are committed to developing students who improve the quality of life for the Wabash Valley. Now would be the first call for citizen comments. Again, you have a 5-minute limit, and this pertains to agenda items only. And we just ask that you would state your name and which agenda item you are speaking on for the record. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Burks made the motion to approve. Mr. Lockhart seconded that motion. Dr. Goller, can I get a roll call on the consent agenda, please?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer? Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Goller. We'll now have the accounts payable docket, and that was the finance committee, which consisted of Mr. Lockhart, Ms. Scott, and myself. We met on Friday, and there are some questions that we submitted to Ms. Wilson, and I believe those were sufficiently answered. So I would entertain a motion for the accounts payable docket.
So move approval.
Second.
Mr. Lockhart made the motion to approve, Mrs. Wise seconded that. Dr. Goller, can I get a roll call, please, on the accounts payable docket?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer?
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Goller. Superintendent Hayworth, donations?
Board, the administration seeks approval for the following donations: from the Vigo County Education Foundation to the Backpack Fund, from the Novellis Corporation to Rio Grande Schools, and from the Community Foundation Emergency COVID-19 Relief Fund on behalf of United Way.
Move approval. Second.
Dr. Powers made the motion to approve, Mrs. Lauer seconded that. Again, we thank everybody who is generously giving their donations. They're truly beneficial to the students, and we thank you for those. Can I get a roll call, please?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to new business, we have the personnel report with Mr. Michael Cox.
President Irwin, Superintendent Hayworth, I respectfully submit the amended personnel report for approval.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Burks made the motion to approve. Ms. Wise seconded that. Again, this is an amended approval. We've seen the amendments. So I would ask for a roll call, please, Dr. Goller.
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer?
Aye.
As a part of that personnel report this evening, we took a step to complete our strategic plan because tonight it's my honor to introduce Matthew McClendon as the Vigo County Corporation's first Director of Civility, Diversity, and the International Exchange Program. Mr. McClendon, if you'd stand up, please. A native of Louisville, Kentucky, McClendon holds a master's degree in educational and counseling psychology from the University of Louisville and is completing a PhD in educational leadership and organizational development also at the University of Louisville. Currently, Matthew develops and implements programming for first-generation low-income and/or disabled students at the University of Louisville. He has a strong background in counseling children with mental and behavioral health needs, as well as experience in the K-12 school setting. He's married to Angelica McClendon, a career technical education teacher at the high school and middle school levels in Louisville. Please help me welcome the McClendons to our community. You guys will stick around. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from people over here in this part of the room.
And it should be noted, Dr. Hayworth, he prefers Matt. He says Matthew makes him feel like he's in trouble.
Sorry about that, Matt. Thank you, Board.
Moving on to the resolution for COVID-19 shutdown, Dr. Hayworth.
Now, if you recall last spring when the governor made his declaration to shut schools down across the state of Indiana, we passed a similar resolution. This resolution really speaks to compensation of employees if such an event were to occur again, capital I, capital F, if an event were to happen again. does this. The superintendent is authorized to implement all measures to ensure the safety, health, and well-being of our students and staff in all aspects of the operation of the school district, including but not limited to seeking waivers from Indiana or federal agencies, adding e-learning days, closing schools, providing appropriate compensation of employees, and paid leave days with and in partnership with VCTA as necessary, and assigning remote work duties. The board further ratifies action taken by the superintendent prior to this resolution in response to the COVID-19 that includes school closures, paid leave for employees, implementation of e-learning days, and appropriate distribution of meals to students. Respectfully place that in front of the board for your approval.
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Powers made the motion to approve. Mr. Burks, I believe you were first. We'll give you that second. Mr. Burks seconded that. And again, I would just like to say this is the big if there's a shutdown. I think, seeing resolution for COVID-19 shutdown makes us think that a shutdown is imminent, or we're doing it right now, but this is just if, and it's to protect our employees' paychecks and the safety of our students.
And allow for fast action.
And allow for fast action, correct. Dr. Goller, can I get a roll call, please, on the resolution?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer? Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Hayward, or excuse me, Dr. Goller. Dr. Goller, you're next with grants.
Good evening, President Irwin, Superintendent Hayward, members of the board. Tonight we have one grant to bring forward. It is the 10% CARES set aside. The Indiana Department of Education has a portion of CARES funding. They have allowed districts through the Title I platform to apply for this funding. Want to thank Dr. Fenton and Dr. Lieberman for their work in looking at this grant and making it available for us. Basically, for this grant, we're eligible for $200,000, and that will allow us to purchase 556 Chromebooks with the full package that Mr. Miller has worked on with our other Chromebooks. So very excited that we can move forward to provide Chromebooks to some of our second graders in terms of poverty. This 10% set aside needs to be used for students from low-income backgrounds that have been disadvantaged in the past. And so we would distribute those Chromebooks to second graders by poverty levels of Title I schools. Very excited to have this funding and ask for your approval this evening.
The reason you chose second grade is because we're already implementing that in 3 through 12, correct? Any other questions for Dr. Goller?
I think in conjunction with the mobile hotspots, we're also trying to implement, that makes it very exciting.
I move to approve.
I second.
Mrs. Lauer made the motion to approve. Mrs. Wise seconded that. Dr. Goller sat down now, so can we get a roll call, please?
Thank you. Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Lauer? Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Goller. This now comes to the time for the second call for citizen comments. This can be on anything related to our schools except personnel. You're limited to 5 minutes, and we just ask that you would state your name for the record.
I'm just going to speak really loud, Dr. B,
Oh,
so you
I'll
don't. Good
It's like I'm
evening,
at home.
I can do this. President Irwin, Superintendent Hayworth, board members. It was in the fall of 2019, I stood before you and I asked for you to support the Wear Red for Ed movement. At the time, we were looking at what our governor and state officials were doing for teacher compensation and wages, the lack thereof. Tonight, I ask you to commit to Wednesdays for Red for Ed, not due to teacher compensation or teacher wages, but due to the health and safety of our students and our staff, and the lack of funding and the lack of respect and response that our governor and state officials have given public schools in the midst of COVID-19. I ask you to please declare Wednesdays, as you did last year, Red for Ed Wednesdays. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no others, we'll move on to committee reports for board members. And our finance committee, we've already spoken about that tonight. The others, we've kind of been
Nope.
quiet lately, just
Nope.
trying to abide by the rules. Dr. Hayward?
I would speak to a couple of things and maybe a little bit to what Jody has already spoke to. The grave responsibility that is been given to local control in regards to the safety, health, wellness of our students and of our staff leads me to believe that our state officials have great confidence in us. I would ask that that great confidence be extended in other areas as well. If we can make life and death decisions in regards to the safety of staff and students, shouldn't we be allowed to make our own evaluation stance in relationship to how well our students are doing and how well our teachers are doing? Shouldn't we be able to put together local systems that still hold us accountable, but then are measured for the children that we serve? So, given this grave responsibility, I think it is consistent that some of those other areas that have mostly been held and done at the state level be turned back to us to let us deal with those situations of evaluation, both of our staff and of our students. When we think of life and death types of situations that COVID brings, in front of you is a dashboard for our district. This dashboard, as you can see, speaks to total number of students that we have, and right now we believe that number is 13,983. In person, we believe that's around 11,000. In terms of staff members, as we know, we are, if not at some points, the largest employer in Vigo County with 2,061 employees. So what we want to do on Wednesdays is to provide information to our community in regard to how COVID-19 is touching our district. We do so by thinking about the number of students positive in a 14-day period that have contact with our schools. In other words, during the infectious period, they have been in a building. As well as students that have actively been quarantined. Maybe they've had contact with a student, maybe sat down beside them at lunch, and that student has been put on quarantine. Quarantine does not mean that you are positive. Quarantine means we are taking precautions to help keep people safe. We will compare those. It'll take us a little while to get this comparison for this box, but we'll begin to compare ourselves over a 14-day period in terms of what that number looks like for the district. Same thing holds true for staff. How many staff positives that were on campus? Not staff positives that never made it on campus. Those would fall under staff quarantine. But staff positive that made contact with students on campus, and then how many staff are actively quarantined. When we think about quarantining, I believe our ability to stay in face-to-face instruction deals more with the number of students that are quarantined and more with the number of staff that are quarantined as opposed to those that actively have the virus. What happens if 15 bus drivers are quarantined? We would be hard pressed to run school as we would know it. Or what happens if 5 cafeteria workers are quarantined, healthy, but we're asking them to stay home, just for precautionary tale? We couldn't maybe serve food in that. So when we think about how engaged our buildings will be and how we are looking forward to continuing to do face-to-face instruction, we need a dashboard that looks at those quarantines and lets us know if we're able to move forward. I would ask the board at this time to take action on this dashboard that would allow us to publish it on Wednesdays, detailing the amount of information that you see in front of you now. So I would propose that as a recommendation from the superintendent.
I would entertain a motion to,
Second.
Mr. Burks made the motion to approve, Dr. Powers seconded that. Again, this is a motion to publicly post this information on Wednesdays. Can I get a roll call, please, Dr. Golder?
Dr. Powers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Irwin?
Aye.
Mr. Lockhart?
Aye.
Mr. Burks?
Aye.
Ms. Flower?
Aye.
Anything else, Dr. Hayward?
Yes, today, our athletic departments were flagged in Vigo County as hot spots. We would love to continue to provide athletics for our district. However, we need help in doing so. Therefore, if you come to an athletic contest, outside or inside, we are asking that you be masked. When you come to an athletic contest, outside or inside, we ask that you socially distance yourself from others. When you come to an athletic contest and the contest is over, we ask that you leave the facility immediately. If we can abide by these simple rules, our children may be able to enjoy a season. In some of our schools, we've had breakouts in multiple athletic teams, but in other schools, we've not had a single breakout. We would like to use those that have had breakouts as learning examples. Not punishing, but saying if we continue in this behavior, we will not be able to continue athletics. And for those that are already doing a good job, we need to lift them up. We need to praise their efforts and reinforce that this is what it's going to take for us to continue. We're at the very tip of this iceberg. We all know the images of what lies underneath the iceberg that you can't see. And that's the remainder of our school year. And not just for our athletic activities, but for band concerts, theater. If we don't start making the right choices now to protect our kids by masking and social distancing, we're putting those types of activities at risk. So my ask of the community is if you come out to enjoy a contest, bring your mask, be prepared to social distance, and when it's over, we'd ask you to leave as soon as it's over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hayward. Anything else for the good of the cause?
I'd like to ask if it would be appropriate for us to ask Dr. Hayward last year when we passed the one for Red Day.
I think that's something we can look forward to on the next agenda,
Would be
correct?
honored to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart.
I have something to add. I'm going to go ahead and put on my dual cap of my school board and my health department cap. To add on to what Dr. Hayworth said, this is a plea to parents and guardians. It isn't even just the athletic events, but to try to have some sense of, and I'm going to do floating quotation, normalcy. Please don't have sleepovers and big gangs of kids at your house or young adults, teenagers, because this is where we're seeing a large number of our cases coming from. And it's, you think you're doing them a favor, but you're not. And in the long haul, you may end up having those, because of all this, it getting out of hand again and school year being altered severely. So please, parents and guardians, do your parts also.
Thank you. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Stick around, introduce yourself to our newest employee, but no handshakes.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be September 14th, right back here in the conference center, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
I did as well.